The notice arrived on a Monday, and by the following Friday afternoon, Aria Voss had learned exactly how many doors a single sheet of paper could close. The first was the letting agent's office. She stood at the counter while the woman behind it scrolled through her screen, lips pursing tighter with each line. "I'm afraid we can't proceed with your application. Company policy, anyone named in a pending criminal matter." The woman wouldn't meet her eyes. Aria had worked at the Plasma Donation Center for 3 years, had never been late on rent, had references from 2 supervisors and a regular donor who happened to be a retired judge. None of it mattered. The letter from the Crown Prosecution Service was enough. The second door closed at the bank. Her accounts were frozen pending investigation. The manager, a man who'd approved her overdraft extension just 2 months earlier, spoke to her through the security screen as though she might lunge at him. "You understand, Ms. Voss, that we have regulatory obligations. If the charges involve financial impropriety, we can't—" She didn't let him finish. The charges alleged she'd sold premium plasma donations on the black market, that she'd falsified donor records and pocketed nearly £40,000 over 18 months. It was a lie. The Jareth family's son had been denied as a donor because his iron levels were critically low, and he'd been drunk enough to offer her £500 to pass him anyway. She'd refused. 2 weeks later, the accusation arrived. The night shelter turned her away because their insurance wouldn't cover residents with open criminal cases. The director looked genuinely sorry, but the door still closed. Her friend Mina, who'd sworn they'd be mates for life after uni, wouldn't answer the buzzer at her flat. Aria could see the light on in the second-floor window, could see the curtain twitch. She stood on the pavement for 10 minutes before she walked away. The temp agency had her details on file, had placed her in holiday cover positions twice before. The receptionist recognized her, smiled, then glanced at her computer screen, and the smile died. "I'm sorry, we've just filled all our current vacancies." It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the jobs board behind her listed 15 openings. The last door was her mother's. Aria took the bus to Ealing, walked the familiar streets, climbed the steps to the narrow terraced house where she'd grown up. Her mother answered wearing the cardigan Aria had bought her for Christmas, and for a moment there was hope. Then her mother's boyfriend appeared behind her, hand on her shoulder. "You can't come here, Aria. We talked about it. If you're charged, if it goes to trial, they'll look at everyone around you. Your mother's benefits, my disability, we can't risk it." Her mother's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I'm sorry," she whispered and shut the door. Aria stood on the step as the light faded. She had a rucksack with 3 changes of clothes, her phone with 18% battery, and £63 in cash. The prosecution had taken her passport. She was due in magistrate's court in 11 days. Her solicitor, appointed by legal aid, had been clear. The Jareths had money, connections, and a barrister who specialized in making juries distrust young women who worked in clinical settings. The evidence was circumstantial but professionally constructed. Someone had falsified records using her login. Someone had transferred funds into an account that shared 4 digits with her national insurance number, but wasn't actually hers. It would fall apart under scrutiny, her solicitor said. But getting to scrutiny required resources they didn't have. She walked. She didn't know where she was going, only that staying still felt impossible. The October wind had teeth, and by the time the sun set fully, she'd made it as far as Hampstead Heath. Her phone died somewhere near the ponds. She kept walking, into streets that grew wider and quieter, houses that became estates behind high walls. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just moving, because moving meant she hadn't stopped entirely. The car appeared beside her without sound. One moment the road was empty. The next, a black vehicle with tinted windows rolled alongside her, matching her pace. The rear window descended. "You're the one from the Whitmore Clinic." It wasn't a question. The voice was male, accent difficult to place, vowels precise and faintly antique. Aria stopped walking. "I don't want any trouble." "You have sufficient trouble already." The door opened. "Get in." Every instinct she had said to run, but she was tired and cold and out of doors to knock on. She looked into the car's interior. Leather seats, a man in the shadows, pale hands folded in his lap. Why? Because I was there the night the Carrick boy tried to buy your integrity, and I have been following the consequences with interest. Because you are currently without shelter, without funds, and 11 days from a trial you cannot win alone. And because I am in a position to alter those facts. He leaned forward slightly, and the streetlight caught his face. White skin, white hair pulled back from sharp features, eyes colorless as glass. My name is Rycroft Jareth. Get in the car, Aria Voss, and I will take you somewhere the doors do not close. She should have asked more questions, should have demanded explanations, assurances, anything. Instead, she climbed into the car because a stranger's offer was still more than anyone else had given her, and she had nothing left to lose. The drive took 40 minutes, winding north into the hills beyond the city's edge. Rycroft, because that's how she thought of him now, the man who'd known her name without asking, did not speak, and Aria found herself cataloging details to keep panic at bay. His clothes were formal, a suit that looked hand-tailored, cufflinks that caught the light. He smelled faintly of old paper and something darker, metallic. His hands never moved from where they rested on his knee, and she never saw him blink. The castle appeared suddenly as they crested a hill, a sprawling stone edifice that should have been a ruin but clearly wasn't, lights burning in lancet windows, walls intact and imposing. The gate stood open, iron wrought in patterns too intricate to parse in the dark. The car passed through and stopped in a courtyard, paved with stones worn smooth by centuries. Rycroft exited first, moving with a fluidity that seemed wrong, too quick and too controlled at once. He held the door for her. Welcome to Thornegate. This is your home? Aria's voice sounded small against the stones. My seat, my court, my domain, by right of law and conquest both. He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone else might say they owned a flat in Zone 3. You will stay here while we address your legal difficulties. You will be fed, housed, and protected. No one will enter these grounds without my permission, and no one who values their existence will raise a hand to you within these walls. I can't pay you. I am not requesting payment. Then what do you want? For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. I want to watch the Carrick family learn what happens when they employ the ordinance of common disgrace against the undeserving. I want to see their barrister's face when he realizes he has made an enemy of me. And I want you to stop being afraid, because fear is a condition that offends me, and you have worn it long enough. He started toward the castle's main entrance, clearly expecting her to follow. Aria stayed where she was. What are you? He paused, turned back. In the courtyard's lamplight, he looked like something from an old painting, all angles and aristocratic disdain. I am the vampire king of the northern provinces, holder of the Thornegate seat, 347th lord under the covenant of night. I am 416 years old. I have ruled this domain for 2 centuries, and I do not offer my protection lightly or frivolously. He extended one pale hand. Now come inside, Aria Voss. You are cold and there is a fire lit in the blue drawing room. Vampires. Real. Standing in front of her, offering shelter. She took his hand. It was cool, solid, absolutely steady. Okay. The interior of Thornegate was a study in contradictions. Ancient stone archways fitted with modern lighting, tapestries on walls opposite abstract paintings, flagstone floors covered in places with thick rugs. Rycroft led her through corridors that turned and climbed, past rooms whose purposes she could only guess at, until they reached a chamber dominated by an enormous fireplace where logs burned with cheerful disregard for the castle's general air of menace. Sit. He gestured to a chair near the fire. I will have food brought. When did you last eat? Aria had to think about it. Yesterday. Breakfast. He left without another word. She sat, because her legs were shaking, and the chair was there, and the warmth from the fire was the first kind thing she'd felt in days. The room was furnished like something between a library and a study. Shelves of books, a desk covered in papers, windows that showed nothing but darkness beyond the glass. She was in a vampire's castle, the Vampire King's castle. He'd known her name. He'd been at the clinic. Rycroft returned with a tray. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, grapes, a pot of tea. He set it on the low table beside her chair. "Eat." "You were there?" she asked, reaching for the bread because her stomach had woken up and was now making demands. "The night with the Carrick boy?" "I was. I require regular plasma donations to maintain optimal health, and the Whitmore Clinic has always been discreet." He settled into the chair opposite hers, movements precise. "I was in the queue when young Carrick propositioned you. I heard you refuse him. I also heard him threaten, quite specifically, to ruin you if you reported the incident." "I didn't report it. I just logged that he'd been turned away for medical reasons." "Which is why his family manufactured the trafficking accusation, revenge, and insurance against any future complaint you might file." Rycroft's fingers drummed once against the chair's arm. "They use the Ordinance of Common Disgrace. Are you familiar with it?" Aria shook her head, mouthful of bread and cheese. "An old statute, rarely invoked but never repealed. It allows certain families, those with hereditary court, standing to bring accusations of moral turpitude that bypass standard evidence requirements. If the accusation is made in good faith, the burden of proof shifts to the accused. You must prove your innocence, not merely raise reasonable doubt." His tone was clinical, but something burned behind his eyes. It was designed centuries ago to allow the nobility to police their own servants without the inconvenience of actual investigation. It should have been struck from the books in 1847. It was not. "So I can't win." The food turned to ash in her mouth. "You cannot win alone, with an overworked legal aid solicitor and no resources. You can win with me." He leaned forward slightly. "I have lawyers on retainer who specialize in dismantling exactly this kind of prosecution. I have investigators who can trace the actual origins of the falsified records and the fraudulent account. I have enough money to make the fight last as long as necessary, and enough influence to ensure the magistrate's court handles your case with appropriate scrutiny. Why would you do this for me?" The question hung between them. Rycroft was silent for a long moment, gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "Because 412 years ago I was accused under the same statute. A different court, a different charge, but the same mechanism. Common disgrace, they called it. Behavior unbecoming. Moral corruption." His mouth twisted. "I was 19 years old, newly turned, and foolish enough to believe that truth mattered. It did not. I was cast out of the very court I now rule, stripped of name and protection, and left to survive as best I could in a world that had no place for me." "How did you get it back?" "Violence, strategy, and 2 centuries of extremely careful political maneuvering. When the previous king made the mistake of challenging me to single combat, I took his head and his throne in the same stroke." He said it the way someone might describe a difficult job interview. "I have never once, in 200 years of rule, invoked the ordinance against anyone. I have never reopened my own case, never sought to have it expunged from the record. I learned to live with the stain." Aria set down her teacup. "But helping me means you'll have to." "Yes." The word was clipped. "Clearing you requires appellate review under the ordinance's own provisions. That review examines all historical cases to establish precedent and pattern. My case will be entered into the record alongside yours. Every vampire in the northern provinces will be reminded that their king was once a disgraced exile. Every detail of that original accusation will be public again." "Then don't." "I can't ask you to." "You did not ask. I am offering." He stood abruptly, crossed to the window. "I have watched the ordinance destroy lives for centuries. Yours will not be another. If the price is my pride, I will pay it." She should have argued, should have told him she couldn't accept, that it was too much. But the truth was she wanted to survive, wanted her name back, wanted to stop running, and he was offering her the only chance she'd been given. "Thank you," she said quietly. He turned from the window. "Do not thank me yet. This will not be easy or pleasant. The Carricks will fight, and they will make it as ugly as possible. You will be questioned, scrutinized, dragged through every mistake you have ever made. And you will have to endure it here, in this castle, under my protection, which means living by my rules." "What rules?" You do not leave the grounds without escort. You do not speak to anyone about the case except our legal team. You attend every meeting, every deposition, every court appearance that I deem necessary. And you trust that I know what I am doing." His eyes met hers, colorless and ancient. "Can you do that?" "Yes." "Then we begin tomorrow. For tonight I will show you to your rooms. Sleep, eat, recover. The fight starts soon enough." Her rooms were a suite in the castle's east wing. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting room, all furnished with the same mixture of old and new. A wardrobe held clothes in her size. "We keep guest accommodations prepared," Rycroft said, not explaining further, and the bathroom had modern plumbing and more towels than one person could conceivably need. He left her with a reminder that breakfast would be available at 8 and that she should rest. Aria stood in the center of the bedroom after he'd gone, trying to process everything. She was in a castle, with vampires. The Vampire King had just promised to fight her legal battle, a fight that would cost him personally, because he'd witnessed her refuse a bribe 6 weeks ago. None of it made sense. All of it was real. She showered, put on the nightgown she found in the wardrobe, and climbed into a bed so comfortable it felt like an accusation. She should have been afraid, should have been planning escape routes or questioning Rycroft's motives or doing anything except what she did, which was fall asleep within minutes and stay that way for 11 hours straight. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she hadn't noticed the night before, and the smell of coffee from somewhere nearby. A tray sat on the table in her sitting room. Breakfast, still warm, with a note in sharp handwriting. "Eat, then come to the library. 3rd floor, west wing." The castle was easier to navigate in daylight. She found the library after only 2 wrong turns, a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books and dominated by a long table covered in papers. Rycroft sat at its head, reading from a leather-bound folder. He looked up when she entered. "Good. Sit. We have work to do." The work, it turned out, was methodical and exhausting. Rycroft had already obtained copies of every document in her case file. His lawyers, 3 of them, appearing via video conference from offices in London, walked her through the accusations piece by piece. When had she worked which shifts? Who else had access to her login credentials? What was the clinic's protocol for handling donor information? Every question was precise, professional, relentless. Rycroft watched throughout, occasionally interjecting with observations so sharp they cut through entire tangles of confusion. "The account number," one of the lawyers said, a woman named Petra with steel-gray hair and spectacles that magnified her eyes. "It's not actually yours, but it shares 4 digits with your NI number. That's not coincidence." "No," Rycroft agreed. "That's someone with access to her personnel file and enough technical knowledge to make the connection appear legitimate at first glance. Pull the clinic's IT logs for the 3 months prior to the accusation. Find out who accessed her file." They broke for lunch, more food appearing as if by magic, though Aria glimpsed a member of staff, another vampire with the same pale features and careful movements, and then returned to the library. By late afternoon, her head was pounding, and Rycroft called a halt. "Enough. You need rest, and we need time to process what we have learned." He closed the folder in front of him. "Petra, I want the IT logs by tomorrow evening. Malcolm, start building the timeline. Sarah, look into the Carrick family's connections to the magistrates who'll be hearing the initial appearance." The lawyers signed off. Aria slumped in her chair. "Is it always like this?" "This is the easy part. Wait until depositions begin." He stood, stretched. The movement was odd on him, too controlled to be natural. "Walk with me." She followed him out of the library, through corridors and down a staircase, until they emerged into a garden she hadn't known existed. A courtyard open to the sky, surrounded by stone walls, filled with plants that shouldn't have been blooming in October but were. Rycroft led her to a bench near a fountain. "You said you were 19 when you were turned," Aria said, because the question had been building all day. "What happened?" "I was the 3rd son of a minor lord. No inheritance, no prospects, intended for the church. I did not want the church. I wanted to study law, to travel, to choose my own path." He gazed at the fountain. "I met a woman at a coaching inn who offered me all of that and more. I said yes. 3 days later, I was a vampire, And a week after that, my family discovered what I had become. My eldest brother invoked the ordinance, claimed I had brought moral corruption into the family, and had me declared disgraced before I could even speak in my own defense. Your own brother? He inherited everything and wanted no complications. A vampire sibling was a complication. Rycroft's voice was flat. I survived because the woman who turned me taught me to hunt, to hide, to fight. I spent decades learning the old laws, the vampire courts, the systems of power. When I was strong enough, I came back. Not to my human family, they were long dead by then, but to the vampire court that ruled these territories. I challenged, I won, I took the throne, and I have held it ever since. Aria absorbed that. Do you regret it? Being turned? No. I regret that it cost me my first life, my first choices. But this life has given me time, power, and the ability to reshape the systems that once destroyed me. He looked at her. I cannot give you immortality or power, but I can give you justice, if you will trust me to see it through. I do trust you. The words were out before she'd fully thought them through, but they were true. He'd fed her, housed her, set his entire legal team on her case, and asked nothing in return except that she let him help. Something flickered in his expression. Then, we will win this. The days blurred into routine. Mornings in the library with lawyers and documents, afternoons spent building her defense piece by piece, witness statements from other clinic staff, records proving she'd been off duty when several of the alleged transactions occurred, IT logs showing that someone else had accessed her credentials from an IP address she'd never used. Evenings, increasingly, spent with Rycroft. He would find her after dinner meals. She ate alone in a small dining room, while he abstained, and they would walk the castle grounds or sit in the library, talking. She learned that he played piano, that he read voraciously, that he had opinions on everything from architecture to constitutional law. She learned that he was exacting but not unkind, that he noticed when she was tired and called breaks before she had to ask, that he had a sense of humor so dry it took her 3 days to realize he was joking half the time. She learned that the castle was home to 17 other vampires, all part of his court, and that he ruled them with a combination of absolute authority and what seemed like genuine care for their well-being. She met some of them. Lucien, his seneschal, who managed the castle's daily operations, Seraphine, who oversaw relations with the human world, Victor, who commanded security. All of them treated her with cautious respect, as though they weren't quite sure what she was doing there, but knew better than to question their king's decisions. "Do they know why I'm here?" she asked Rycroft one evening as they walked the battlements, the city glittering in the distance. "They know I am assisting you with a legal matter and that you are under my protection. That is sufficient. Do they think it's strange? They think many of my decisions are strange. I do not rule by consensus." She laughed despite herself. "That must be nice. It has advantages." He paused at the wall's edge, looking out over the darkened hills. "You are different here than you were that night I found you. I'm not terrified and homeless anymore, that helps. No, you are still afraid of the trial, of the outcome, but you are not diminished by it. You stand straighter. You argue with the lawyers when they are wrong. You have stopped apologizing for existing." He glanced at her. "That is who you are meant to be." The observation landed somewhere deep in her chest. Society doesn't generally encourage women to stop apologizing. Society is frequently wrong. He said it with such finality that she smiled. The preliminary hearing is in 5 days. Petra believes we have enough to force the magistrate to demand proper evidence from the prosecution. And if we don't? Then we escalate. We file for appellate review, we invoke every procedural protection available, and we make the Carricks wish they had never learned your name. His hand rested on the stone battlement, inches from hers. "I told you I would see this through. I meant it. It's going to hurt you. The review. Your case. Yes. I'm sorry. Do not be. I made this choice. I will bear its consequences." He turned to face her fully. "You did nothing wrong, Aria. You refused a bribe. You upheld your integrity when it would have been easier and more profitable to do otherwise. That should never have resulted in punishment. If rectifying it requires my discomfort, that is a price I pay gladly." She believed him. That was the strange part. She'd known him less than 2 weeks, but she believed him completely. The preliminary hearing was held in a magistrate's court in North London, a modern building that smelled of floor polish and stress. Aria wore a suit Rycroft had provided, tailored, professional, far nicer than anything she'd owned before, and sat beside Petra at the defense table. Rycroft sat behind them in the gallery, flanked by Lucian and Victor. His presence was a weight she could feel without looking. The prosecution's barrister was a man named Cholmondeley, silver-haired and smooth-voiced, who laid out the case against her with the confidence of someone who'd never lost. Falsified records, missing inventory, a bank account stuffed with unexplained deposits, a pattern of behavior suggesting calculated theft over many months. Petra dismantled him. She presented the IT logs showing unauthorized access to Aria's credentials. She called a witness from the clinic who confirmed Aria had been on holiday when 3 of the alleged thefts occurred. She introduced bank statements proving the suspicious account had been opened using a forged signature and that none of the deposits had ever touched Aria's actual finances. The magistrate, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, listened to everything and then adjourned for a week to consider whether the case should proceed to trial. "That went well," Petra said as they left the courtroom. "She's not convinced by their evidence. I'd be surprised if this goes forward." But Aria had seen Cholmondeley conferring with a man she recognized from news photos, Gregory Carrick, the family patriarch, and she'd seen the way he looked at her, cold and satisfied. Rycroft saw it too. They are planning something. 3 days later, the Carricks filed a motion to have Aria declared unpersoned under a subsection of the Ordinance of Common Disgrace. The legal argument was arcane and vicious, because she had failed to disprove the accusations within the initial 60-day period, and because her alleged crimes constituted moral turpitude of a severity that endangered public trust. She should be stripped of legal personhood pending trial. If granted, it would mean she had no standing to defend herself, no right to legal representation, and practically speaking could be harmed or killed without legal consequence. "This is obscene," Petra said during the emergency conference Rycroft called that evening. "That provision hasn't been used since the 18th century. No modern court would uphold it. The Carricks have 3 magistrates in their pocket and a barrister willing to argue that precedent is precedent." Rycroft's voice was ice. "We cannot assume rationality." "Then we file for appellate review immediately," Malcolm said. "Force it into a higher court where they have less influence." "Agreed. Draft the motion tonight. I want it filed first thing tomorrow." Rycroft's gaze moved to Aria. "This changes the timeline. We move now, or we lose." The appellate review motion was filed the next morning. It triggered exactly what Rycroft had said it would, a comprehensive examination of every historical case brought under the Ordinance of Common Disgrace to establish whether the statute was being applied consistently and lawfully. That meant his case, Rex versus Jareth, 1612, would be reopened, examined, and entered into public record alongside hers. The vampires of the northern provinces noticed immediately. "They are asking questions," Lucian reported at dinner 3 days later. Aria had started joining the court for evening meals, sitting at Rycroft's right hand while the others dined on blood poured into crystal glasses, and she ate actual food. "The younger ones do not remember. The older ones do, and they want to know why you have chosen to revisit it now. Tell them the truth. I am correcting an injustice. They will see it as weakness. Then they are welcome to challenge me and discover otherwise." Rycroft's tone could have frozen stone. "I rule this court. I do not answer to their opinions." Seraphine, elegant and cool, leaned forward. "My lord, the question is not about their opinions. It is about the law itself. If the appellate review finds in favor of the human, if it determines that the ordinance has been misapplied historically, the precedent will affect vampire courts as well. The families will resist. Let them resist. The ordinance is unjust. It has always been unjust. If this review leads to its repeal, that is a victory, not a complication. You would overturn 4 centuries of legal tradition for one human woman?" Victor's voice was careful, but the challenge was there. Rycroft stood. The room fell silent. I would overturn 4 centuries of legal tradition because it is wrong, because it has destroyed lives without cause or recourse, because it was used against me, and I have spent 200 years pretending that wound does not exist. He looked at each of them in turn. Aria Voss did nothing wrong. She will not be punished for the Carrick's spite. If that requires reopening my past, so be it. If it requires rewriting the law, better still. And if any of you wish to contest this decision, you know where to find me. No one spoke. After a long moment, Lucian inclined his head. As you say, my lord. Rycroft left the hall. Aria waited 30 seconds, then followed. She found him in the library, standing at the window, hands braced against the sill. Are you all right? No. The word was bitten off. But I will be. She crossed to stand beside him. They're worried about you. They are worried about stability, about tradition, about the fact that their king is about to have his greatest humiliation paraded before every court in the country. He exhaled slowly. I knew this would happen. It does not make it easier. We could stop. I could withdraw the review, take my chances with... No. He turned to face her, and his eyes burned. You will not sacrifice yourself to spare me discomfort. Do you understand? I have lived 4 centuries. I have survived wars, plagues, betrayals, and a dozen attempts to take my throne. I will survive this. But I will not survive knowing I let you be destroyed when I had the power to prevent it. The intensity in his voice stole her breath. Why does it matter so much to you? Because you are the first person in 200 years who has made me remember what it felt like to be that boy. His hand came up, hovering near her face but not touching. You refused the bribe. You did the right thing, knowing it would cost you. I was that foolish once. I believed integrity mattered. And then the world taught me otherwise, and I spent centuries learning to be hard, to be ruthless, to care for nothing except power and survival. His voice dropped. And then I saw you, and I remembered. And I could not let them do to you what was done to me. Aria's heart was a drum in her chest. Rycroft, you should return to your rooms. We have a long day tomorrow. He stepped back, putting distance between them. Sleep well, Aria. She wanted to argue, wanted to close the space he'd created, to tell him that she saw him too, that somewhere in the past 3 weeks he'd stopped being her benefactor and become something else entirely. But his expression was shuttered, and she knew when to retreat. Good night, she said, and left him standing in the library's shadows. The appellate review hearing was set for a cold morning in late November, held in the High Court before a panel of 3 judges. Aria sat with Petra and the rest of the legal team at one table. The Carricks and Cholmondeley sat at another. And Rycroft sat in the gallery, perfectly still, while the prosecution laid out 4 centuries of precedent supporting the ordinance's continued use. Then it was their turn. Petra presented the modern case, Aria's, with all its evidence of falsification and malice. Malcolm followed with a historical analysis showing that the ordinance had been applied inconsistently, disproportionately against women and the poor, and almost always at the behest of wealthy families settling personal grudges. And then Sarah stood and said, "We would like to call a witness to speak to the ordinance's historical misuse, Lord Rycroft Jareth." The courtroom stirred. Rycroft rose, walked to the witness stand, and swore his oath with a hand that did not shake. The presiding judge, a gray-bearded man named Haverford, studied him with open curiosity. Lord Jareth, you are the vampire king of the northern provinces. I am. And you were yourself accused under the Ordinance of Common Disgrace in the year 1612? I was. Can you describe the circumstances? Rycroft's voice was steady, clinical. I was 19 years old, newly turned vampire. My eldest brother invoked the ordinance to have me declared disgraced and removed from the family. The charge was moral corruption. I was given no opportunity to defend myself. The ruling was summary, and I was exiled from the court and stripped of all family ties. What was the basis for the charge of moral corruption? I had become a vampire. That was sufficient. Haverford leaned forward. And you believe this was an unjust application of the statute? I believe it was a convenient application of the statute. My brother inherited title and property. I was a complication he removed using a law designed for exactly that purpose, the elimination of inconvenient people without the burden of actual justice. Cholmondeley rose. Objection. The witness is offering opinion, not fact. The witness is offering testimony based on lived experience, Sarah countered. He is uniquely positioned to speak to the ordinance's historical application. Haverford allowed it. For 2 hours, Rycroft answered questions. He detailed his case, his exile, the decades he spent clawing back to a position of power. He described other cases he had witnessed over the centuries, servants accused by masters, women accused by husbands, anyone without resources accused by those with them. He was precise, unflinching, and utterly devastating. Cholmondeley tried to shake him on cross-examination and failed. Lord Jareth, is it not true that you are personally involved with the defendant? I am providing her legal assistance and protection. You have housed her in your castle for over a month. You have funded her entire defense. Some might say you have a personal interest in the outcome. I have a personal interest in justice. Ms. Voss did nothing wrong. The charges against her are fabricated, and the Carricks are using the ordinance exactly as it has always been used, to destroy someone who inconvenienced them. I will not allow it. You will not allow it? Cholmondeley's tone was mocking. Are you claiming authority over this court? I am claiming moral authority over my own actions. I was destroyed by this law. I will not watch it destroy another. The hearing adjourned. The judges would deliberate and issue a ruling within a fortnight. Aria and the legal team returned to Thornegate. Rycroft disappeared into his private chambers and did not emerge for the rest of the day. Lucian found Aria in the library that evening. He will not see anyone. Is he all right? That depends on one's definition. He is not harmed. He is not weak. But he has just relived the worst period of his existence in front of a courtroom full of strangers, and he is proud. It will take time. Can I see him? Lucian considered her. You are the only one he might permit entry. His chambers are in the north tower. Knock first. She climbed the tower stairs and knocked on the heavy wooden door at the top. Silence. She knocked again. Rycroft, it's me. Can I come in? A pause. Then, the door is open. His chambers were austere, a bed, a desk, shelves of books, a fireplace. He stood at the window, looking out into the dark. He'd removed his jacket and tie. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He looked exhausted in a way she hadn't known vampires could. You should not be here, he said without turning. Probably not. She closed the door behind her. But I am. I do not require comfort. I'm not offering comfort, I'm offering company. She crossed to stand beside him. You were incredible today. I was a spectacle. You were honest. You told the truth, and you didn't flinch. That barrister tried to tear you apart, and you didn't give him an inch. I gave him everything. My past, my humiliation, my... He stopped. You do not understand. For 2 centuries, no one has dared mention that case in my presence. It was erased, forgotten, and now it is public record again, attached to your case, examined and dissected by judges and lawyers and every vampire who cares to look. I know, and I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Then stop pretending you're fine when you're not. She turned to face him fully. You did this for me. You reopened that wound because I needed you to. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what it cost. He looked at her finally, and the pain in his eyes was raw. I was so young, so foolish. I thought becoming a vampire was freedom. I thought my family would understand, or at least accept. Instead, my brother looked at me and saw a tool for his own advancement. He used that law to erase me, and I could not stop him. His voice cracked. I have spent centuries making sure no one could ever do that to me again. And today I stood in that courtroom and admitted that once I was powerless. I was nothing. You were never nothing. Aria reached for his hand, held it. You were 19 and betrayed by someone who should have protected you. That's not weakness. That's not shame. That's just cruel luck. The court does not see it that way. They see their king revealed as human. She squeezed his hand. They see you as someone who was human once, who suffered, who survived. If that makes you weak in their eyes, they're idiots." A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. "You are absurdly kind. I'm really not. I just see you." She stepped closer. "You've spent weeks protecting me, feeding me, fighting for me. You've given me back my life. The least I can do is remind you that you're more than that one terrible thing that happened to you." Aria. Her name on his lips was almost a prayer. "You are brilliant and ruthless and capable of incredible kindness. You play piano and you make terrible jokes and you care about justice so fiercely it scares your entire court. You are the vampire king of the northern provinces. And yes, you were also a 19-year-old boy who got hurt. Both of those things are true. Neither of them makes you less." He was looking at her the way he had that night in the library, all intensity and hunger and something almost like hope. "You should not be here. You should not be saying these things." "Why not?" "Because I have been in love with you since the night you refused that bribe, and if you continue to stand this close and speak to me like that, I will not be responsible for what I do next." The words hung between them. Aria's heart kicked against her ribs. "Rycroft, you were so fierce, so certain. He offered you money, safety, and you looked at him like he was garbage and said no. I have met warriors with less courage." His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "And then they tried to destroy you for it, and I could not, I would not. I swore to myself that I would keep you safe, that I would give you back everything they tried to take. And somewhere in the process I stopped being your protector and became something else entirely." "What else?" "Yours." The word was barely a whisper. "If you will have me." Aria had stopped breathing. "You're the vampire king. I am also a man who has not felt this way in 400 years. A man who watches you argue with lawyers and thinks you are magnificent. A man who wants very badly to kiss you if you would permit it." She answered by closing the last inch between them and pressing her lips to his. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other at her waist. The kiss was everything she hadn't let herself imagine, fierce and tender and utterly consuming. He tasted of night and winter and something darker, and when he finally pulled back, they were both shaking. "Aria," he breathed against her mouth. We should not." "Tell me to leave and I will." She looked up at him. "But if you want me to stay, I'm staying. I want you to stay. I want you to stay here, in this castle, with me, for as long as you will have it. I want to wake every evening knowing you are under my protection. I want to tear apart anyone who tries to harm you. I want—" He stopped, collected himself. "I want things I have not wanted in so long I had forgotten what it felt like." "Then take them, take me. I'm right here." He kissed her again, slower this time, reverent. When he spoke, his lips brushed hers. "If we do this, if you give yourself to me, I will not be able to let you go. Do you understand? I am not human. I do not love lightly or temporarily. If you are mine, you are mine, and I will defend that claim against anyone and anything." "Good," she smiled against his mouth, "because I'm not going anywhere." They did not leave his chambers that night. He was careful with her, achingly so, as though she might break. She let him learn her, let herself learn him in turn. The places he was cool to the touch, the places he wasn't. The way he said her name, like a benediction. When he asked if she was certain, she pulled him closer and told him she had never been more certain of anything. Afterward, she lay against him in the dark, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "Your heart doesn't beat." "No." "That troubles you?" "No, just different." She traced idle patterns on his skin. "The court is going to have opinions about this. The court can have all the opinions they wish. It will not change anything. What if the ruling goes against me? What if the judges uphold the ordinance? Then we fight. We appeal higher. We take it to the Supreme Court if necessary. And if all else fails, I invoke my authority as Vampire King and grant you sanctuary under covenant law, which supersedes human statutes." His hand stroked her hair. You will not be unpersoned. You will not be harmed. I will not allow it." She believed him, fell asleep believing him, safe in his arms, in his castle, behind walls that had stood for centuries. The ruling came down 12 days later. The judges found that the ordinance of common disgrace had been applied inconsistently and unjustly throughout its history, that it violated modern standards of due process, and that its provisions allowing for unpersoning were unconstitutional. They recommended immediate repeal and ordered all cases brought under the ordinance in the past 5 years reopened for review with proper evidentiary standards. Aria's case was dismissed with prejudice. The Jareth family was censured for abuse of process, their hereditary court standing was revoked, and Cholmondeley was referred to the Bar Council for professional misconduct. The Ordinance of Common Disgrace was struck from the books 3 weeks later by Act of Parliament. Rycroft's historical case was expunged from the record entirely, with a formal notation that the original ruling had been made without proper foundation and was void ab initio. The night the news came through, Thornegate held a celebration. The vampires of the court gathered in the great hall, glasses raised, toasting their king who had rewritten the law itself. Rycroft stood at the head of the table with Aria at his side, and when Lucian proposed a toast to justice, Rycroft corrected him. "To Aria Voss, who reminded me why justice matters." She felt her face heat. "You did all the work. You gave me the reason." He took her hand, raised it to his lips. "And now, you have a choice to make." "What choice?" He addressed the room. "The ordinance is repealed. Ms. Voss's name is cleared. She is free to return to her life, to reclaim her career, to walk through any door she chooses." His eyes met hers. "Or she can stay. Here, with me, as my consort, my partner, and if she is willing eventually, as one of us." The room went silent. Aria stared at him. "You want me to stay? I want you to choose freely. I want you to know that if you stay, it is because you wish to, not because you have nowhere else to go. You could leave tomorrow. You could rebuild your life. You have that freedom now. And if I stay, then you are mine, and I am yours, and we reshape this court together." He gestured to the castle around them. "I propose we open Thornegate as a house of asylum. Anyone who has been cast out, who has been accused unjustly, who has nowhere else to turn, they come here, and we protect them. We become the door that does not close." Understanding bloomed in her chest. "You want to make this official. I want to make it permanent. I want you beside me, not as a guest, but as an equal. I want to spend the next century teaching you everything I know and learning everything you have to teach me. And yes, I want to offer you the turning when you are ready. Not now, you should have time to be human, to be certain. But eventually, if you wish it." Aria looked around the room, at Lucian, who was almost smiling, at Seraphine, who nodded once, at Victor, who raised his glass, at the vampires who had watched her for weeks, uncertain what to make of the human in their king's castle, now waiting to see what she would say. She looked back at Rycroft. "I choose you. I choose this. I want to stay." The room erupted in noise. Rycroft pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of his entire court, shameless and joyful. When they finally broke apart, he kept her close. "Then it is done. Aria Voss is under my protection, my consort, and the future mistress of Thornegate. Anyone who harms her answers to me." The celebration lasted until dawn. By the time it ended, plans were already underway. Thornegate would be declared a sanctuary, formal agreements would be drafted with human legal aid societies, staff would be hired to manage intake and casework. Aria would oversee the human side of operations. Rycroft would provide the resources and the protection. It took 6 months to make it official. The gates of Thornegate were declared permanently open on a spring evening, with a ceremony attended by lawyers, activists, and a surprising number of vampires from other territories. Aria stood beside Rycroft as they cut the ribbon, and then watched as the first group of asylum seekers, 3 women fleeing domestic violence, a man wrongly accused of fraud, a teenager thrown out by his family, walked through those gates and were welcomed inside. "This is real," she said quietly, watching the intake team guide the new arrivals toward the castle. "This is necessary." Rycroft's hand found hers. "And it is only the beginning." They worked side by side through that first year. Aria learned vampire law, protocol, politics. She met with human aid organizations, built networks, fought for funding. Rycroft taught her to navigate his world, introduced her to other vampire rulers, shielded her from the ones who thought a human consort was a weakness. The few who challenged him learned otherwise very quickly. She turned down the turning twice. "Not yet. I'm not ready. Tell me when you are." The third time he asked, she said yes. It was 2 years after the night she'd first walked through Thornegate's gates, and she was 30 years old and ready to choose immortality with the man she loved. The turning was painful, beautiful, strange. She woke 3 days later in Rycroft's chambers with her senses on fire and her heart silent in her chest. He was there, holding her hand, guiding her through the first terrible thirst and the disorientation that followed. "Welcome back," he said, and kissed her. Being a vampire was nothing like she'd expected and exactly what she'd needed. She was stronger, faster, sharper. The work at Thornegate became easier in some ways, harder in others. She could protect the people who came through their doors now, could stand beside Rycroft as a true partner, could hold her own in vampire courts, where once she would have been dismissed. 3 years after her turning, Rycroft proposed marriage. They wed in the castle's chapel, a ceremony that blended vampire tradition and human ritual, attended by their court and by the dozens of people Thornegate had helped over the years. Aria wore white and silver. Rycroft wore black and looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "I love you," he said as they danced at the reception, the great hall full of music and laughter. "I love you too." She leaned into him. "Thank you for opening the door. Thank you for walking through it." The years spun out. Thornegate's asylum program grew, expanded, became a model, replicated in other vampire territories. Aria sat on councils, advised on policy, fought legal battles that reshaped how vampire and human law intersected. Rycroft ruled his court with the same fierce intelligence he always had, but tempered now with something softer, the knowledge that he was no longer alone. On the 10th anniversary of the night they met, they stood together on the battlements where they'd once walked as king and refugee. The city glittered below them, the castle hummed with life behind them. "Do you ever regret it?" Aria asked. "Reopening that wound, the review, the case, all of it?" "Never." Rycroft pulled her close. "It gave me you. It gave us this. It rewrote a law that should have been struck centuries ago. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Good, because I'm planning to keep you for a very long time. Forever, if I have my way. Forever works." They stood there as the night deepened, 2 people who had been thrown out by the world and had chosen instead to build their own. Behind them, Thornegate stood with its gates open, lights burning in every window, a beacon for everyone who needed a door that would not close. And in the years that followed, those doors stayed open. People came, the accused, the exiled, the desperate, the lost. They were welcomed, protected, helped. Some stayed, some left once they were stable. All of them remembered that when society had thrown them out, the vampire king and his consort had called them their own. Aria and Rycroft built a life that spanned decades, then centuries. They fought battles, won victories, suffered losses, celebrated triumphs. They argued and reconciled and learned each other in ways that only immortality allowed. They were partners, lovers, friends, co-rulers of a domain that became known as much for its justice as its power. And every evening, when Rycroft woke, the first thing he did was reach for Aria. Every evening she was there. The castle stood. The gates stayed open. The doors did not close. And the girl society had thrown out lived forever after with the king who had chosen her, in the home they had built together from protection, justice, and love.